Her title is Supporting the Landowners of Private Protected Areas. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Um, Great, thanks everybody for coming. I know there's a lot of really interesting concurrent sessions going on, so I appreciate you being here. I'm a PhD student at Monash University, so I'm just going to be presenting a little bit of the research that I've got going on there with Dr. Carly Cook. So we're all very well aware that for effective biodiversity conservation, it requires not only commitments by, but partnerships among governments, private landowners, businesses, communities, the whole gamut. We've heard a lot of great talks about that the last few days. I'm going to be focusing on private lands for this talk, and there's been a variety of strategies that have evolved over the years to try and encourage protection on private lands, and this is just kind of one way of kind of organizing all of those options. And I'm going to be talking down about conservation covenants, particularly in the context of Australia. This is similar to conservation easements found in other countries. So for those of you who may not be so familiar with it, a conservation covenant is a binding agreement between a landowner and a covenant provider, such as a state environmental agency, in which the landowner agrees to set aside the land use rights on their property so as to protect the environmental values there. So the landowners can continue to own and live on the property, and there may be kind of proactive management obligations under that covenant as well, such as getting rid of non-native or invasive species. Just as a side note, these management activities do incur costs for the landowners. Some landowners are able to get incentive payments for a period of time, but many landowners don't receive payments for management on their property, so sometimes these costs are out of pocket or through competitive grants. The covenants they are tied to the land title, so they're meant to run in perpetuity. Those land use restrictions do apply to subsequent landowners. So I know there's a lot going on in this map. Please ignore the larger green and brown polygons. It's these colored points more around the periphery that are the covenants I'm talking about. There's over 5,000 of these in Australia, covering about 4.5 million hectares. If you heard Carla's talk about a half hour ago, she was pointing out the importance of private protected areas, of these areas with regards to threatened species and habitats. And then the colored points and shapes just indicate different covenant providers at the state level around the country. So there is some quite a bit of variation there, and it's typically referring to state agencies or land trusts. As with public protected areas, oftentimes it's the number of covenants or number of hectares that are used as a measure of success. We all know that's really only part of the story, so I'm going to just briefly talk about some thoughts towards what is a successful covenant. And certainly protecting the natural values in these areas is considered a success, limiting subdivision on the properties, limiting development. But in conversations that I've had with staff who administer these programs, it's really quite clear that it depends, meeting these kind of environmental goals really depends on the landowners themselves, what their attitudes and their interests and their capabilities on managing those properties. So if so much depends on the landowners, then how are things going for them? There's a lot of really great research that focuses on trying to understand the motivations or what motivates landowners to enroll in conservation programs like covenants, but there's very little known about how things are going for the landowners months or years after they've put a covenant over their property. So that's where some of my research comes in. We wanted to understand what challenges the landowners face, if any, when they're trying to meet these obligations under the covenant. And when I'm talking about landowners in this context, it's basically private individuals or families. I'm not getting into businesses or organizations here. And we also wanted to know what kind of changes the landowners would recommend to the covenanting program or process based on their experiences. So I conducted interviews with over 80 landowners across 4 states in southeastern Australia. This is where most of the covenants occur. These were hour-long, semi-structured interviews, so it really gave the landowners an opportunity to kind of take the responses in any direction that was most relevant to their situations. We then inductively categorized their responses to get to kind of assess and interpret the data. So I want to quickly introduce the landowners themselves just to kind of give a little more context and understand some of their characteristics. So first of all is just the covenant provider. So this is with whom the landowner has the covenant, with whom they've signed the covenant. And again, there's a variety of these, even across those 4 states where I did the interviews, a mix of state agencies and land trusts. There's whether the landowner was the original signee to the covenant or whether they were someone who inherited or purchased a property that already had a covenant in place. So their attitudes might be a little different since they didn't have a say in that covenant. There's differences amongst the size of the covenanted areas of the people that I spoke with. It ranged from about 15 hectares to thousands of hectares. So there's certainly different management issues that may come along with different property sizes. And then just really quickly, there are differences in work status. So were they working full-time, part-time, retired? Were they living on the property or were they absentee landowners? And were they using other parts of their property that weren't covenanted for non-conservation uses, maybe production or hobby farms? So a range of characteristics, a range of situations, but actually across all of that diversity, we found that the top 4 challenges were kind of just repeated quite often amongst all of those landowners, regardless of their characteristics. So for the sake of this talk and the time that I've got, I'm just kind of merging all of those landowners together. So this is percent respondents and the top 4 challenges that they're seeing. This might be one of the simplest bar charts you see today, or graphs. So the top ones are issues with neighbors and issues with pest species. No real surprise there. These are issues that tend to be external to the landowner. Things that they feel like they don't have much control over. So it may be things like land uses adjacent to their property or wide-ranging invasive species that really need more of a landscape scale approach. They're also talking about limited capacity due to financial or physical constraints, and also simply not knowing how to best manage their property. So if anybody's looking for a study system for scientist practitioner gaps, that's a place to go. There was a much longer tail. There was another 12 or so challenges that people are experiencing, but these were the top ones. As for the recommended changes, again, similar things kept coming up across the landowners, so I'm just talking about all of them merged together. And again, this is 4 of about 10 or a dozen recommended changes. And so the top one, again, kind of no surprise, is an interest in increasing financial support to help with management activities on the properties. This was closely followed by a need for an increasing technical support in the form of advice or information or even sharing equipment. This kind of relates back to an interest in increasing the support network of the landowners. Many of them would like to have more contact with the covenant provider or more contact with other covenanted landowners from whom they can kind of share information and experiences. And there were a subset of landowners who were generally satisfied with the program and process in the sense that they weren't recommending any changes to it. So just some kind of quick highlights and take-home messages. I think the main one, or the first one, is that signing on to a covenant really shouldn't be the end goal. That's not a novel statement, but I think it's something that really needs to be reiterated a lot more often. Because of past land uses and surrounding land uses, these properties, even though they're protected, many of them are kind of in a slow state of degradation if there is not active management going on the properties. So getting that paper signed is just step one. And then if the success of these covenants does ride so much on the landowners, then we need to understand the landowners. We need to understand what their constraints are after these covenants are put in place, not just what's going on with them before they sign on. And then, kind of in light of waning government interest and commitment over time, or the fluctuation of that interest over the years, where might there be opportunities to provide more consistent support networks for the landowners? If we're really serious about conserving biodiversity on these properties, then are there some ways that we can help the landowners help the land, maybe through encouraging more community engagement or better connecting covenanted landowners to each other? There's a lot more I can say about that, but I think I'm running out of time, so please do come and find me afterwards if you'd like to chat about it some more. Thanks.
Any questions for Julie? We have a minute for that. We have here in front.
That was great, Julie. I wanted to know if the landowners reported any positive impact of conserving that, like maybe they have a crop and they have like pest control or, you know, recreational values. I don't know if you also examined that.
Yeah, so that's another thing that I'm going to be looking at. I was thinking about that a few weeks ago, that there are some positives going on in these conversations, and I'm just focusing on the negatives. But yeah, actually, a lot of it kind of came down to improving their own knowledge and understanding about the land over time, and kind of changing their attitudes about it. So some of them kind of came into a covenant without really knowing what they were getting into, but then their level of appreciation has kind of increased over time, and they've become more of a kind of spokesperson for conservation covenants. So that's kind of one of those positives, is just a better appreciation of the species and the habitats and the value of conservation.
We have time for more questions. Sorry. Yep, there. Sorry, it's there. Yeah, probably, yeah.
So I'm just wondering, given how much government funding is being cut in Australia and how governments generally in our country seem to have declining interest in conservation, do you think there's any hope at all of governments actually providing funding? Because clearly it's a big constraint for landholders who want to do the right thing.
Yeah, I would like to say yes. So there has been increased support in previous years, kind of between 2006 and 2011 or so. There seemed to be this big uptick in financial support for protected areas, and some of that was shifted towards private land conservation. It's decreased quite a bit in recent years, and the staff that I was talking to were feeling pretty much dismayed because their numbers, the staff, have just been cut back and cut back. So I don't know what it's gonna like. I don't think anything's gonna happen quickly in the next year or two, but I mean, there's yeah, it's going to depend on political will, and a lot of that I think comes from the general public and their level of interest and how much they're pushing the government to support these kind of initiatives.
And if I could just ask a second short related question, do you think there's any opportunity for using conservation volunteers and networks of conservation volunteers and linking?
Yeah, I think that would be a great thing to have happen. And yeah, I think there's a lot of opportunities there for connecting people who want to do work and people who need the work, but those links aren't fully there just yet.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. Please put your hands together. Prachi. Her title is Connectivity in a Fragmented Landscape, A Tale of Two Species.
Thank you. Hi all, I am Prachi. I'm a PhD student at NCBS Bangalore, with Dr. Uma Ramakrishnan, and I'll be talking about my work on connectivity of tiger and sloth bears in central India. So India has lost substantial amount of forest cover over the last 200 years, and what remains is highly fragmented. Fragmentation, as we all know, disrupts several ecological and evolutionary processes and can lead to isolation of habitats. We wanted to understand how fragmentation had affected two forest-dependent species, the tiger and the leopard in central India. For both these species, Central Indian landscape is a stronghold in terms of their distribution and abundance, and hence we wanted to do the study here. However, this landscape has been undergoing rapid development. It's one of the landscapes which has undergone massive land use change in the last 20 years, and is projected to undergo huge land use change. So we wanted to understand the current levels of connectivity in the landscape for both these species. For this, we collected poop samples, fecal samples to extract DNA from protected areas and outside protected areas. Using genetic data as a response variable, we inferred the effect of different landscape features. For example, if roads affect tiger movement, or if agriculture has an effect on sloth bear movement, and so on. And then we tried to understand, we saw if the patterns are different, and tried to explore why could there be similarities or differences. I carried out the study in central India, which has several protected areas at varying distances from each other and with varying amount of forest connectivity between them. So the black outlines are the protected areas and the green areas are the forest cover. So there's a lot of forest cover which is not protected. We collected samples from field by walking on trails and roads, and extracted DNA, used microsatellites to identify individuals, and finally we had 120 tiger individuals and 112 sloth bear individuals, with which we carried out the genetic analysis. We carried out landscape genetic analysis, which basically involves correlating genetic distance to landscape or the geographic distance, which is the Euclidean distance, the straight line distance between the locations where we collected samples, and something called cost distance. I'll explain cost distance with an example. So imagine an arboreal squirrel species, which is restricted to forested habitats. For it to cross a patch of 100 meters or 1 kilometer of forested areas may be much easier than crossing a forest, a grassland patch. Say due to predation risk associated with it. So there's a cost associated with movement through unsuitable habitat. This, of course, is species specific, and we wanted to understand this species specific cost for tigers and sloth bears. So what we did was we used several landscape variables. We used land cover, human population density, road data. So for roads, we didn't just use presence of road, we parameterized it with the traffic data. So just having a road may not mean it affects movement. The amount of traffic on it might matter. We use railway lines and density of linear features. So this area has several irrigation canals, roads, and railway lines, which crisscrosses through the forest and agriculture. So we use density of linear features. What we wanted to understand is the maximum resistance each of these landscape variables offer. For example, if the x-axis is human population density, we wanted to understand what is the maximum resistance it offers, and the shape of the relationship. So as the human population density increases, does the cost or resistance associated with crossing it increase linearly, or is the relationship nonlinear? So these are the two variables we wanted to understand, for which we use genetic data to optimize. I will not go into the details of methods, but I'll be happy to discuss if anybody has questions. We carried out this analysis under different scales because there are two species. We don't know at which scale they respond to the landscape variables. So we used these rasters at resolutions from 100 meters to 50 meters. And what we found was the first step was just exploring the genetic data. So we found that we did individual-based clustering analysis with the genetic data to see if the landscape has different genetic clusters. And we found that tiger shows hierarchical structure, which means that at first level it gets separated into two clusters, which are not completely isolated from each other, but individuals within one cluster are just genetically more similar to each other than individuals among the clusters. And then the upper cluster gets divided further into two clusters. So this might suggest ongoing genetic differentiation. Sloth bear, on the other side, did not show genetic structuring. So, but having a single cluster does not mean that there's no effect of landscape. There still might be isolation by distance and effect of landscape features. So we carried out analysis which looks at these relationships. So this shows isolation by distance. The x-axis is geographic distance, y-axis is the genetic distance, and both show a significant correlation with with geographic distance. So as the geographic distance increases, the genetic similarity decreases. So this is seen in both. Tiger shows higher correlation with distance than sloth bears. Then we carried out the landscape genetic analysis, and we found that land cover, human settlements, and road impacted tiger movement. And these had effects at different scales. So land cover was affecting movement at a much smaller scale than human settlements. Also, traffic was an important parameter, and what we found was the relationship, the x in the Mathers graph was very non-linear, which means that only roads with high traffic affect movement, and the smaller roads with low traffic do not affect movement, have negligible effect on movement. So this is how the resistance or cost map looks, where the lighter colors are where tigers can move easily, and the darker colors, which are mostly cities and very high traffic roads, are are detrimental to movement. However, we did not find any effect of landscape on sloth bear genetic differentiation. None of the variables explained the genetic differentiation more than just the distance. So we wanted to explore why. So because sloth bears are smaller than tigers, so are found at higher densities. So one possible reason is just that there are many more sloth bears in the landscape than there are tigers. Both the numbers and dispersal affects genetic differentiation, so this could be one reason. The second reason is that from previous study in the lab, we know that tigers have undergone a bottleneck, and the decline has been almost 90% over the last 200 years, where we have lost tigers. So we wanted to explore these two explanations. So we carried out simulations using the density and dispersal ability of both the species. So the map is just for representative purpose. We assume that wherever there's forest cover, these tigers and sloth bears can be present. So given according to their densities. So given the tigers and sloth bears are present wherever there's forest, what do we expect the genetic differentiation to be? And we found that both of them do show isolation by distance, but tiger shows lower relationship with landscape than sloth bear, which was not we found earlier. So this doesn't, just the higher density of sloth bears doesn't explain the observed genetic differentiation. The second thing was whether the decline in tiger numbers over years, and the fact that they are currently mostly restricted to protected areas, does that explain the observed genetic differentiation? So what we did was we carried out similar simulations, but we restricted both tigers and leopards to protected areas. And this showed that both of them had a high genetic differentiation. So this shows that if both are restricted to protected areas, both of them will have high genetic differentiation. This is again not what we see. Tigers do show high genetic differentiation, but sloth bears have a lower genetic differentiation. So this implies that the individuals, sloth bear individuals which are outside protected areas, are critical in maintaining that connectivity what we see currently. This is also supported by several recent studies which have shown that sloth bears there are many more sloth bears outside protected area than there are tigers. So in summary, human footprint shapes tiger genetic structure in central India. None of the landscape features explain genetic differentiation in sloth bear, and demographic history and the current distribution may explain the genetic differentiation observed, and we need to take a landscape approach to conservation from shifting our focus to protected areas to a landscape approach. Thank you.
Thank you, Prachi. We have time for a couple of questions. Okay, I have a question for you. I have a question for you. Yep. What was the biggest challenge to put all this information together? Because, wow, it looks a big data set. So what was the biggest challenge to achieve it? In your opinion, in your experience?
One of the bigger, it was not the biggest, it was not a big challenge, but one of the things that took time was the simulations, because we did it for 200 and 500 generations, and just that was just a small patch of landscape I showed, but if you do simulations for the whole landscape, it's just computationally intensive. It just takes time, that's all.
That's part of conservation, right? Okay, thank you so much. Now, the next speaker is Cecilia Barriga. Her presentation is entitled Sustainable Agriculture at the Biological Station in the Amazonian Foothills.
¿Esta no es?
Una anterior. Esa.
Good morning. My name is Cecilia. I'm from Conservación Amazónica, or ACA. I'm going to present about a program that we have at the biological station about sustainable agriculture in the Amazon. ACA, or Asociación para la Conservación de la Cuenca Amazónica, is a non-profit organization that works with conservation in the Amazon, and also providing sustainable alternatives for live means. And we are working in Peru for 16 years now, so we are one of the pioneers working in this area. The strategic focus that we have is we have 4 strategic areas. We were conducting research in habitat protection, threat identification, sustainable life means, and science and education. So our program of agriculture, sustainable agriculture, is framed in sustainable life means. So for this, ACA has 3 biological stations. Huayquecha, Villa Carmen, and Los Amigos. So these, our biological stations are located in the southeast of Peru. They are in the Amazon basin, strategically located from the Andes Mountains to the Amazon rainforest. So the biological station that this program is in Villa Carmen. I think, is this working? The green? No. Well, Villa Carmen, as you see, is in the yellow one in the apps in the app part. So it is located in the buffer zone of Manu National Park, one of the most diverse areas in the world. And we have towns near, and also indigenous communities. Let me see. So Villa Carmen Biological Station was established in 2010. Previously, it was a diversifier farm, so this is when all begins. The main objective of Villa Carmen Biological Station is first to promote scientific research, to have links with local communities, and to also have, we hold education programs, so field courses, and also scientific and conservation tourism. And here we have the program of sustainable agriculture. This is Villa Carmen, the area. You can see. So it's about 4,000 hectares, and it's in the Andes foothill when it meets with the Amazon rainforest. So we have different types of vegetations around the area, and it's from lowlands forest to elfin forest. And here we have here's the facilities of the biological stations, and all this was previously dedicated to agriculture. So all these areas they're recovering now, and we have a small part here, which is here dedicated to sustainable agriculture. So the general goal for our program is to create an experimental and learning campus, so we can contribute with the knowledge of sustainable agriculture in the Amazon. So to try to understand all the challenges that we face, we know the soil of tropical forest is one of the poorest in the world because of all the rainfall. It washes away the nutrients and minerals from the soil, and so it needs its vegetation to maintain all the fertility. So it's if it doesn't have it, it's very hard so it's going to be unfertile. So we know agriculture is not the best way to use Amazon land, but however, 113,000 hectares of Peruvian Amazon are lost every year, and 90% of this is due to agriculture. Why? Because people here use migratory agriculture. They cut down the trees and they grow their crops until it's no longer productive, and then they leave the space and they move to another place. So in this very rich area, it's very it's a shame to see this. So we have the program in Villa Carmen, and we have different areas. So we have 4 production areas. So because we want to know how are the best ways to have this agriculture since it is present in the area. We have the mandala, which is an orchard. We produce vegetables, and also production plots where we produce tropical fruits and major crops. And all these are used in the kitchen of the biological station. So we are trying to be like self-sustained in a certain manner. And all these are, we work with local farmers, so we take their knowledge and we will combine it with techniques of conservation agriculture. We have a plant nursery, which supplies with plants for all the production areas and all the experiments. And we also have a composting area. Here we use all the food leftovers and the crops leftovers to produce organic fertilizers. Another big component of this, or important component, is research and education. So we have conducted a research about the biochar. Biochar is a product of a pyrolysis of a given biomass. In this case, we are using a native bamboo there that grows very fast, and it's very common there's a lot of it. So the biochar clinic was built in 2014 and was one of the first in the Amazon, on the Peruvian Amazon. And we are producing this biochar as amendment so we can try to preserve some characteristic of the soil for agriculture. So we have the experimental plots, and we are using some of these amendments or different techniques. So we're trying to explore what works. We work with local crops like pineapples, banana, yucca, and so. We also have a germ plants bank where we have chili peppers, capsicum. We have 30 varieties of Peru, of Peru chilies. We also have banana, 10 different varieties of bananas from local varieties. We have also this manioc, yucca. These are 16 accessions. They are not even like described varieties, so they are from the nearby localities. And this is, well, a lot of research that we can do here. So of course we want to reach out local people so they can learn and start applying this. One way to do it is through local internships. So we receive young students from local institutes, and they learn, and they are also applying this. They are doing some small research during their time that they're there. For example, here Anna is doing applying nettle pest repellent for yucca, and also we participate in local fairs, so we can tell people what we're doing and why we're doing this. So we have a lot of interest from people there. They always like go to the station and try to. They want to participate. So future steps for our program, we have where we're already start doing is working for agroforestry, which we know all the benefits that we have in terms of environmental benefits and economic opportunities, since we are going to diversify the production in different terms. And we also have here, because we're like in the initial stages, where we have a lot of research opportunities. In fact, in all of our different areas. So I encourage you, if you want to promote to do research here in sustainable culture or any, so we have these biological stations in the Amazon. Thank you very much.
We have time for a couple of questions, if you have it. Any question? There? There. On your back, yeah. No? Oh, sorry. He was waving the hand. Okay, I have a question for Cecilia. Besides money, because to do conservation we need a lot of money. Yeah. I mean, resources in general. What's the second most, the resource that you needed to keep doing this huge endeavor?
First, of course, besides money, it's, I think, researchers to want to do this. We have, because we had fundings to do this program, we had a call for research in this area, and we wanted to do it with Peruvian researchers, because to promote this, to have this opportunity for them. So we see it's like not that much interest in doing this, but it's very important, I think, because this is one of the most diverse areas. We're like in the buffer zone of the Manu National Park, and it's very important. And I think, so if you have any interest, so you can contact me.
It's with me, with all the plenary. That's good. Okay, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Acércala. Tranquilo, tranquilo. Is Natalia Ocampo Peñuela. Her presentation is entitled Forest Connectivity for Seed Dispersal in Borneo, before and after oil palm development. Adelante.
All right. Sí.
El verde.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. I apologize for my voice. A lot of networking last night, but I think it's good. Yeah, so I'm gonna talk on behalf of other people also. John Garcia is also here, and so if you have questions, I will tell you what part of the presentation you should approach John for. This is also in collaboration with David Gavo from C4 and Jaburi Gazul. And the three of us, John Jaburi and I, are in ETH Zurich and work in a project called OPAL, Oil Palm Adaptive Landscapes. So I think it's no surprise to any of you that oil palm is an important driver of deforestation, and especially in Southeast Asia. Indonesia and Malaysia account for 80% of the oil palm production in the world. This picture I took in East Kalimantan. You can see the mountains here, completely forested. You can see this lowland forest, and this was recently cleared, and if you look closely, all of these are oil palms. So palm oil demand continues to increase. It's used in a lot of products, and so it's an issue that we can not ignore. A lot of the research that has been done, especially in Southeast Asia, has focused on comparing biodiversity inside plantations and outside plantations. And now we know, and it's important that we do, that oil palm is no replacement for forest. This talk tries to move these studies at the landscape scale, and it's kind of a first attempt at doing that. So first, to say that Borneo is the third largest island in the world. I'm sorry I don't have a map of the location of Borneo, but it's located in Southeast Asia. It's divided between 3 countries, Indonesia, Malaysia, and Brunei. And it used to be completely covered by forest. In the middle of Borneo, we have the mountains, or what's called the heart of Borneo over here. And then it's surrounded by primary forest in the lowlands. But as you see, even in 1970s, it had already lost some forest. Now, in the 80s and 90s, there was a big boom of oil palm. It was introduced, and the pollinator was introduced, and it was huge. It's just very productive. And as a result of that, and of course logging and other things, a lot of the forest was lost in the lowland areas. So by 2000, this is what Borneo looks like. And this continued, but not as strongly as in the first 3 decades. Now, I want you to keep these maps in mind because I'll be using them throughout the talk. So the aim of this project is to investigate the impacts of this expansion of oil palm in the lowlands of Borneo for animal-assisted seed dispersal. So it has this kind of ecosystem approach. And what we try to get at is seed dispersal potential. And I'll explain that in the last four decades. And the idea is that we can understand how the seed dispersal has been impacted so that we can design better oil palm landscapes, because as I said, it will continue to expand. We try to do this in 3 ways. First, we evaluate how this expansion has impacted the distribution of the animals, how it has fragmented their ranges, and how it's impacted the connectivity of their distributions. So for this, we use range maps freely available by IUCN. This is what we see here in blue. This is for the Asian black hornbill, which prefers to live under 200 meters, likes the forest, and it's a good seed disperser. First thing we do is we refine this range by elevation. So everything below 200 meters we keep, and everything above we delete because it's not suitable for this species. And then we further refine the range by forest using first the map from 1973 and then the map for 2015. So here in lime green and in teal, you see the distribution, the suitable area for the Asian black hornbill. And as you can tell, of course, it's it was decreased a lot, but also it's very fragmented. We do this for 82 species. These are all species that have been known to be good seed dispersers in the literature. So that's how we select the species. And so we have 25 mammals and 57 birds. And we do these refinements for the ranges for 1973 and 2015, and then we stack them. We basically add them up. So the resulting map looks like this. This is a map of seed dispersal potential, as we like to call it. So this doesn't mean that these species are necessarily moving through there, but that there is habitat for them to be there. And these warm colors mean that there is concentrations of up to 60 species, so very high seed dispersal potential, whereas blue means that not so much. This is the picture in 1973, and when we go to 2015, you can see that a lot of the warm colors, especially in the lowlands, have become cold, which means they no longer have those species there because the forest was lost. So we see that, yes, the distributions of these birds and mammals have been severely impacted, but these are models, and in order to test the models, we're collaborating with some people in Sabah that have bird data to test that these species are really there. But what we do see is that the areas that used to hold these species and have the seed dispersal potential have been lost and are probably not going to be recovered. What we also see is that the mountains are in really good shape. And so this is good news. As you probably know, oil palm grows only under 1,000 meters above sea level. The second thing that we do then is evaluate how fragmented these ranges are. So by refining the ranges, we end up with little pieces of the distribution, and we can count these patches and we can know the area of all of these patches. And of course, that alone is not too informative, but this is why we also do connectivity. So this is the result for fragmentation, and this is for all birds. We're still working on the mammals. This shows the number of patches on the y-axis, and these are patches under 10 square kilometers. 10 square kilometers is really not a healthy patch for most forest species. So it might be used as a stepping stone or an area to feed, but most likely it will not be used as a breeding area for a lot of these animals. And these are patches between 11 and 100 square kilometers. In lime green, you can see what this number of patches were in 1973, and then in teal in 2015. And it's very obvious that the number of small patches has increased in the last 4 decades because of fragmentation. As I said, the most interesting story really to us is connectivity, because this is how you keep seed dispersal. And so this is work led by John, and you can definitely approach him for that. But what we quantify is equivalent connected area. So of all that range that I showed before, how much of it is effectively connected, which means that the species are moving through the landscape. And this is the most important measure for seed dispersal, because they have to move to be able to keep the genetic connectivity of the plant. So just to walk you through what this measures connectivity between each pair of patches in the landscape. And for that, of course, the area of those patches is important. But the other thing that's important is the probability of the species moving between these patches. In turn, this probability of dispersal is impacted by the permeability of a matrix. As we've seen in different talks, some species are reluctant to move through some matrices, and oil palm can be an impermeable matrix for a lot of forest species. And then the dispersal capacity of the species. A hornbill, which can fly over the canopy, will not move the same as a pitta, which kind of walks in under the canopy. So these are some results for a subset of species, and what this shows in the y-axis is the percent loss of connected area. So higher bars means that the connectivity was lost in the last 4 decades. And what's striking here is that some birds haven't really lost that much connected area, and some really have. These birds over here are birds that are found on oceanic islands or high elevations. And as I said, the mountains of Borneo have remained forested. However, these other 2 birds are birds that prefer low elevations. And these are the birds that had their ranges more severely impacted. We did this for all the birds. Again, these are results just for birds. And over here, you can see the elevational range. So these birds are all restricted to under 1,000 meters, which is the same distribution of oil palm plantations. And in blue, we can see animals, birds that cannot move across oil palm. So this matrix is not permeable for them, whereas the ones in red can move across oil palm, and these are not that many birds. So what we see here really is that yes, I mean the distribution of birds that is conflicting with oil palm and they cannot inhabit higher elevations are having the highest effect on their connectivity. As I said, yes, it's important to see what the impacts are, but what we want to do really is to inform the future of oil palm expansion by defining corridors that are working for a lot of seed dispersers, and also informing certification requirements for biodiversity-friendly oil palm. So I'd just like to thank you and take some questions if there's time. Thanks.
Really interesting talk. Any questions? There? Sorry. Here.
Hello. One of the things I was really interested in is how you're kind of parameterizing the dispersal through the different landscapes and your understanding of the permeability, or how the permeability is affecting the different species. So can you explain a little bit about how you're taking that smaller scale study, I understand, the field study, and expanding it to all these different species? Are you seeing that you have enough data to kind of adequately inform the model?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's actually the biggest challenge of these kind of like large scale modeling of connectivity. So what we've done is taken existing dispersal models that take into account the weight of the species, which is often a good proxy for dispersal ability. So we're not using data from the field yet. We have done these models and we're looking to test them with radio tracking of species moving in the landscape. So all this, what we do is we take the birds and mammals and put them into categories of dispersal. And what we've found is that when you tweak this dispersal distance, it doesn't really impact the model that much. So we thought this was going to be the biggest problem, but we find that if you change it from like 1 kilometer to 10 kilometer, the impact on the model is not as high as you would expect.
Quick question, maybe? Quick answer as well?
The state of alternatives to oil palm. I mean, oil palm oil, I guess, and either natural or synthetic. Do you have any sort of...
Sorry, what was the first part?
What is the state of alternatives to oil palm oil?
Yeah, that's so oil palm is the highest productive, like it's the best yield in vegetable oil. And if you change oil palm by any other vegetable oil, the area you'd need is much larger. So there are some products in which you can replace oil palm for other things, but if you replace it by another vegetable oil, it's going to be even more area that you'd need. So right now, yeah, people should be working on this.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Natalia. Our next speaker is Bob Smith from University of Kent. His presentation is entitled, "Is buying or renting land the best way to develop ecological networks on private land?" Bob?
Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. It's great to be here. Yes, I'm going to be talking today about some work that we've been doing that's been funded by Natural England. And, oh, excuse me. I want to start by specifically acknowledging the work that Assaf Schwartz, one of the co-authors here, has done. And that's not just because he's sitting in the audience. He did a lot of this work. And I also want to start with an apology. This talk contains too much information. But what I really want to do as part of this talk is present the early days of this work, because I'd really appreciate people's feedback on what we're doing. So to start off with Aichi Target 11, which I'm sure lots of you are familiar with that whole set of text. But recently, people have been focusing on this aspect here, the focus on other effective area-based conservation measures. And why is that? Well, we've got these targets that we're aiming to meet by 2020, and in some cases it's proving difficult. So to illustrate that, about 15 years ago we did an analysis of the protected areas of England and discovered that they covered about 6.3% of the country. They're mostly in upland areas, they're mostly in the land that nobody wants. That map there shows the different ecoregions and how well they're protected. And also in England, they're really small. 80% of England's protected areas are less than 1 kilometre squared. Our smallest protected area is 60 metres squared. But there's been a big change in focus since then. The UK government has recognised that we need more land in conservation and we need bigger landscapes. So we came back and redid the analysis and discovered that in the last 15 years, the protected area coverage has increased by 0.07%. So it's proving difficult to expand our protected area network. But at the same time, we have about 12% of land in under agri-environment schemes. And as you can see from that map, they're much better at representing biodiversity in the country. They're also much better at forming larger landscapes. And the reason for this is most of England is privately owned. There's a huge number of small and medium-sized patches owned by different private landowners. So if we're going to make a difference in conservation, we need to come up with policies that recognise that. So, people that we were working with in Natural England about 3 or 4 years ago approached us and started talking about this idea of, hypothetically, when is it better to buy land or when is it better to rent it? Where renting we see as agri-environment schemes. The person in particular who approached us was just intrigued by the fact that at the moment, £0.6 billion is being spent on agri-environment schemes in England. And he always had this feeling of, well, would we be having better conservation outcomes if that money was put into the bank and we could use it to buy land? So he was interested in this sort of hypothetical idea of what are the trade-offs involved in whether it's better to buy or rent land. And then we have Brexit. Suddenly our whole conservation policy is thrown up in the air. A few days ago, our new Minister for the Environment, Michael Gove, one of the architects of Brexit, a very popular man in conservation, but he came up with this statement that in the future farm subsidies must be earned. So he is talking about that farmers in the future, if they're going to get these subsidies, they need to be doing more for the environment, they need to be doing more for ecosystem services and biodiversity. So suddenly, we're not talking hypothetically anymore. These are issues that are really important to inform future debate. So, in response to this, we developed this software called CELMA. Every project needs an acronym, which stands for Comparing Environmental Land Management Approaches. And this is an agent-based model. And this is the complicated thing. As you can see on the right, there are just too many stages. But what it aims to do is look at what are the different conservation outcomes when you vary conservation budgets, the proportion of budgets for buying or selling land, and the landowner willingness. And then on top of that, you can vary the habitat restoration rate. And at the moment, it's quite a simple system. We're continually building on it. But at the moment, the metric of conservation success is the biodiversity score, which is basically the amount of land under conservation management adjusted for how big the patches are and how long they've been under conservation. The longer they've been under conservation, we assume the better they are for biodiversity. And to talk you through that fairly unpleasant looking diagram, it basically involves working out what your budget is each year for buying and renting land, and you do that by your assigned money, you work out the costs of the rental agreements, and you work out the costs of managing the land if it's bought. You then work out the standard buy and rent offer. So in this system, in this model, the government comes up with an amount of money that they're going to offer to every landowner, a standard amount, and based on the opportunity costs of buying or renting. You then look at the landowners who are interested. You identify the ones who are interested when they're given that offer. You select the best land unit for buying land and then the best land unit for renting land, and then you go through that process iteratively until all the money's used up in your buy budget and your sell budget. And so for the example that I'm presenting here, we just we had a sort of mythical landscape consisting of 900 hexagons of varying land quality, because obviously it's more likely that a landowner will accept one of these offers if their land is less productive. We assumed that there was a budget of £100,000, and we looked at 5 scenarios going from all the monies from buying to all the monies for renting. For the buying, we assumed that if you buy the parcel, 100% of it is under conservation management. For renting, we assumed that it would only be 20% of the land, and that matches roughly the situation in England. Farms under agri-environment schemes have got about 20% of their land that they manage for biodiversity. We assumed that the rental period was 10 years, and we also assumed that if the rental period stopped and the land was no longer continuing to be under conservation management, its biodiversity value dropped to 0. And we used this factor here that models how quickly the biodiversity value of the land increases, and we use one where that was pretty quick. So this is assuming it would be something like a wetland system where, while it's being managed, the biodiversity value quickly increases. If we did this with woodland, we would probably get reasonably different results because it would take much longer for the biodiversity value to increase. And as I mentioned before, it's a system where the government does this standard offer based on the opportunity cost for an average farm. And then we had parameters that looked at the landowner's likelihood to accept those offers, depending on what we called whether they were enthusiastic, positive, neutral, or reluctant. And so that map there shows that's what happens if a person is offered the exact opportunity cost of their land, and the proportion of people saying yes varies like that. This is the probability if they're offered 50% more than the value of their land. And you can see that if you're enthusiastic, if you're offered 50% more, you're highly likely to accept. Whereas if you're reluctant, even then, with more than 50%, you're likely to say no. So the results. Based on this range of results, we tried a whole set of different scenarios. That's the worst one there, so that illustrates the areas in the dark green are the existing protected areas that we set as being 5% of the landscape. So this involves, for each scenario, you run it a large number of times and get different results each time. Here's the outcome that had the highest biodiversity score, so you can see that illustrated there. So we had 80 scenarios and 100 runs per scenario and got different results like that. But the key results are the more money you spend on buying, the more biodiversity you get. So very strongly that buying is better for biodiversity. Similarly, the more willing people are to be engaged, the higher the biodiversity results, but it gets sort of slightly complicated as you get more willing. So when you're looking at reluctant people, you get very little. If they're neutral, you get more. Oops, sorry, that's not what I meant to do. And here, if the people become slightly more enthusiastic for renting, again, you get improvements. But when things start getting really positive, if you've got enthusiastic for selling and renting, that's actually less good than when you have people who are enthusiastic to sell but reluctant to rent. So in some cases, people being positive about renting makes things worse. So why is that? Why was buying land always better for biodiversity? Well, more of the land gets selected based on this model. As I said, for renting, we had 20%. For buying, we had 100%. And it's under conservation for longer. You don't have the problem of the agreement might run out, so the biodiversity value drops to 0. Why did increased rental willingness have different impacts? Well, if you're not careful, if someone's enthusiastic about renting, it might mean that they won't buy later on. So sometimes renting makes things worse by stopping land being available for buying. So how can we improve conservation outcomes? Well, we need to increase the biodiversity benefits of renting land, and we need to increase the willingness to sell. And the future work, we want to look at these things. We want to look at different conservation instruments. And we also want to add functionality to SELMA so that we can look at more complicated measures of biodiversity rather than just this area under conservation. And so finally, the conservation community is increasingly looking at these other effective area-based conservation measures. We're spending an enormous amount on agri-environment schemes, globally billions of dollars, but it's looking as though there are issues there, and we would argue that we need to look at this in more detail, and that software like SELMA lets you do that. So we're hoping that certainly in the UK, we're going to have more creative ways of looking at these issues in the future, and hoping that SELMA will inform that. Thank you very much.
We have time for one question. There in the middle. Thank you.
Hi, thank you. Very interesting talk. Just wondering, this is sort of based upon the assumption that it doesn't appear to me to take into account the likelihood of effective management. And I'm wondering about particularly smaller areas of land. The reality is that land that's purchased and is therefore under public ownership, there may be significant costs associated with that which perhaps aren't able to be borne. Whereas land that is rented, I'm guessing that remains under conservative ownership by the landowner. And so is that the case? Is there a difference there?
Yes, there's definitely differences in the cost. I mean, our model accounts for the cost of managing the land when it's bought, using really good data that's been collected in the UK. So yes, it is definitely more expensive to buy, and I think again that's one of the reasons why historically people have thought that agri-environment schemes are better, because you pay less money in instalments. But despite all those issues, it does look as though buying wins out. Although there are all sorts of assumptions in the model, and that's one of the things that we want to explore in the future, is how sensitive they are to the different parameters.
Thank you. And last but not least, our friend Gonzalo Cortez Capano is gonna give us a talk entitled Conservation Planning and Systematic Literature Review for Private Land Conservation in Uruguay. Thank you, Gonzalo.
Hey everyone, thank you very much. Muchas gracias a todos por estar. And also thank you very much for the previous speakers for their very interesting presentations. My name is Gonzalo Cortez Capano, and I'm a PhD student at the University of Helsinki at the Digital Geography Lab. And today I'm going to present the work that we've been doing that is entitled Conservation Planning and Systematic Literature Reviews to inform private land conservation development in Uruguay. This is an ongoing project and involves many different institutions, not only the University of Helsinki, but also la Universidad de la República of Uruguay, the NGO Vida Silvestre Uruguay, and the National System of Protected Areas in Uruguay. So, as we all agree, human societies rely on biodiversity and ecosystem services to thrive and develop. However, we are facing an unprecedented global environmental crisis that threatens not only biodiversity, but also human well-being. Protected areas have been traditionally the cornerstone of biodiversity conservation. However, we now have enough evidence that they might not be sufficient to counteract the current environmental crisis. So there is an agreement that we need to develop and implement complementary strategies to promote conservation and sustainability, particularly embracing a social ecological approach where not only the biophysical conditions are included in our analysis, but also social aspects. So private land conservation, as many talks have been showing previously in the Congress, have many potentials to increase the total area under protection, complementing protected areas, to involve different stakeholders in landscape management, to increase ecological and socio-economic connectivity, and also to reduce social conflict. However, effectively integrating private land conservation into national strategies, it's challenging because there is a need to address complex social, ecological, institutional, legal, and economic processes that are typically context dependent. So our area of study will be Uruguay. That it's an interesting case study because private land covers more than 90% of the country, and the national system of protected areas covers approximately 1% of the country, with private land conservation being 95% of the areas within the national system of protected areas. So it's almost all of the countries is under private tenure. The country, as you see in the maps, is located in the South American temperate grasslands, and which is the least protected biome worldwide. And in the last decades, the country has been shifting from traditional land use with cattle grazing on native grasslands to intensive agriculture and exotic species afforestation, which threatens biodiversity and ecosystem services. And there are problems and opportunities in this because the government doesn't have any strategy to promote voluntary private land conservation, which is a problem in Uruguay, but also an opportunity to start and learn from other experience in other countries. So to take the most of this opportunity, we are collaborating with academia, NGOs, and local and national governments. So this is also part of my PhD, which aims to identify the suite of appropriate strategies to promote effective private land conservation according to the biodiversity priorities, to the preference, motivations, and needs of landowners, and also to the national institutional context. So as a first step, we have conducted a spatial conservation prioritization with two main objectives. One is to identify the most important areas for biodiversity and ecosystem services conservation while exploring trade-off with agricultural and economic and commercial forestry, which were the most important threats to biodiversity, but also to identify the most important landowners to engage in conservation actions. So this work has been published, and the lead author, who is Enrico Diminin, is in the audience. So if you have also questions about this, he will be happy to answer. So they included data on species distribution, ecosystem distributions, and also ecosystem services distribution, by taking into account also the suitability for afforestation and intensive agriculture. And the interesting thing is that they did it for at the rural cadastral unit, which is the management and decision-making unit for private land. So they end up with a priority map for conservation at the rural cadastral units. So we know now what are the top 17% priority properties to promote conservation and to account for the Aichi 11 target, but the questions that we are facing are how do we go from 1% to 17% following these priorities? What are the most appropriate strategies to engage these landowners in conservation initiatives, and what can we learn from other countries' experiences? So we've been conducting a systematic literature review with the aim to assess the private land conservation scientific literature worldwide in order to inform policy making at the national level in Uruguay. So we've been searching in Scopus for keywords related to private land conservation strategies and incentives, and we got our initial search gave us 729 articles, which after manual sorting to select only those articles that related to strategies ended up in 244 articles. This graph is just to show you that the trend in the number of publications is increasing. So what about the geographical distribution of the research? We found that the papers were only coming from 25 countries, the area of studies, and 75% were conducted in 4 countries, being the US, Australia, Canada, and South Africa, the most important ones. We then analyzed the content using keywords or concurrence networks, and I'm not going to go into the details with this, that can be quite complex, but just to show you that there are 3 main topics that keywords are showing, keywords clusters are showing, and the blue one has to do with property rights, landowners and management, the red one with biodiversity and environmental protection, and the green one with conservation on productive landscapes. So we also wanted to understand what were the most addressed policy instruments and incentives in the literature. And we found that property rights as a policy instrument related to property rights were the most important ones. For example, conservation easements in the US or covenants in Australia accounted for 73% of the publications, and then followed by market-based incentives such as ecotourism and certification schemes, and financial incentives. So no monetary incentives were less covered in the literature. And when it comes to stakeholder engagement, that is extremely important if we want to develop sound policy to promote private land conservation. We found that in the research, no stakeholders were involved in 49% of the articles published. And within those articles that involve at least one sector, the private sector, for example, landowners or private companies, were the most involved sector, followed by civil society, NGOs, and typically land trust in the US, and the public sector, local and national governments were the least involved sector. So we have some preliminary conclusions and to open to discussions. This is we've been collaborating with the government and with NGOs, and we want to make a sound policy. We want to work to bridge policy and science. So we identified that the most important landowners for representing biodiversity and ecosystem services. We explored the scientific evidence on private land conservation strategies, and we found a geographical bias, that the information is geographically biased, so there is need for more studies on different countries and social ecological contexts, so, legal and also institutional, and there is a need to actively involve different stakeholders, cross-sector approaches, not only one groups, but also try to put them together to think about strategies. And then there is also a need to go beyond set-aside schemes and look for win-win opportunities for conservation and production. And finally, there is a need to effectively integrate private land conservation in national strategies and land use planning and management, embracing a social ecological system approach. Just to finalize, I wanted to show you that different stages that we will be working and that we are working. We started with the National Spatial Conservation Prioritization, then the systematic literature review, and we are also interviewing landowners, making choice experiment to understand their preferences, and semi-structured interviews to understand in depth their needs and motivations. And we are also conducting institutional context analysis with the aim of identifying suitable policy instruments and also to be able to spatially prioritize these instruments according to different regions of the country. So, thank you very much, everyone.
Okay, any question for Gonzalo? We have a question here from. I can do that. I can do that.
Oh, I think it's a very good presentation. My question to you is, if you are given money, you would continue doing the studies, or would you save lands? Would you save the private whatever biodiversity in Uruguay, or would you continue doing studies on strategies?
Can you repeat? Excuse me.
If you are given substantial amount of financial support,
Yeah.
would you, prefer to actually go and save the biodiversity in Uruguay, or would you continue doing research on strategies for saving forests?
Well, I guess that we are working in a country with limited resources for conservation. This is the context. So we need to come up with creative solutions. So I guess that it's the interface between the limited resources and the opportunities that it can be complex, but also it opens opportunities, especially because we strongly feel that if we want to conserve biodiversity in the long term, we need to find strategies to involve people and to go beyond the land sparing approach, which can be very important for many species, but not for the long-term sustainability. So our country is covered by grasslands that need to be managed, and we don't have anymore the large populations of native grazers. So we need the people there managing these grasslands and cattle ranching for the successional status to continue and conserve these endangered temperate grasslands. So I don't know if I answered. Thank you very much.
Can you repeat the question? Can you repeat the question or the commentary in the comment? The comment was about the.
I'm sorry. No, the comment was about that most of the strategies and the evidence you correct me if I got it wrong, but the people that are developing these strategies don't have the time, most of the time, and resources to publish these kind of strategies. So it's important to learn. So in that sense, it could be very interesting to go into the grey literature. That I guess that there are many reports from different organizations. I'm the coordinator of the only voluntary program land conservation initiative in Uruguay, and we don't have the time or resources to publish. So I completely agree with what you are saying. So the idea will be to move to analyze the grey literature, but it's very complex to do it in a systematic way. So this was the first approach to get the broad picture, and then we might go further to include what you are suggesting. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Gonzalo, and thank you all the speaker and all of you for your presence. It was Conservation in the Matrix. So all of them are gonna be here. So if you need more questions or if you have more comments to do, go. They are here. They are super friendly, super good friends. And one message: if you have the application on your mobile phone, can you upload your data, your personal data? It's one request from the organizers. And with this, see you then. And thank you so much. Bye bye.